Welcome back to the Lanterne Rouge cycling podcast presented by Zwift, a cycling platform that makes training fun. Here with Benji for three things. Trofeo Laigueglia recap quickly. Are UAE legit better than last year? 11 runs, 11 wins, not a cricket podcast yet, on the board already. And a Strada Bianca men and women's preview. But first, in case you missed it, you probably did because it's not broadcast outside of Italy. Rai bought the worldwide rights and only show the race in Italy, which is helpful. Trofeo Laigueglia, Doc Pro race on the Wednesday before Strade. Not many of the Strada favourites here though, unfortunately. Hilly course. Mollema won in a solo last year. Lovely race. Lance won, I think, in 95. He was in his early 20s on Motorola. I think I did a video on that. Anyway, UAE had the best team. Port was here. I gotta say, Vidi, how scared were you for Port? Because there's some technical descents here that you have to hit at speed.
I was honestly quite scared because in this parkour, like you say, there are descents, but there's like consecutive descents. We've got 4 times the Cola Micheri at the end, and that's a pretty technical descent, and that's the one where I was most scared because they would be hunting down those descents and others would try and attack him in those descents and so forth. And like in a short summary, we had a front group opening up with a strong presence of riders, 6 UAE riders. We had 4 riders of Ineos. We had, I think, 5 riders of Intermarché, 2 riders of Groupama and so forth. So a pretty strong breakaway, which was definitely going to make it. And Rodriguez was hammering it, Carlos Rodriguez for Ineos, for Port in the descents. And I was so scared when Rodriguez was making those moves for Port in the descents because, it's Port.
Port didn't let his wheel go. And I was
Yeah.
like, Richie, just let it go. Like, it's tactically fine. Anyway, eventually we have the Cola Micheri that Benji mentioned. It's like 2Ks 8.2%. And then there's the Capo Mele last climb, not far from the finish, downhill run into the finish in Laigueglia. And we had a front group form. UAE were the strongest team eventually and all day, really. Front group form of 3 riders. Covey, Ayuso, the young Spanish talent, and Lorenzo Rota, who I said would do well in Stage 1 Giro. And he's a good guy at this race for Intermarché. We had Rodriguez dropped. He was chasing from behind with Jan Palance, who'd attacked. He'd gotten to the group, and then he'd attacked on the Capo Mele and then got dropped by the 3 I mentioned. But in the run-in, we had Lorenzo Rota pacing. And was that for points, Benji? Trying to guarantee the top 3? Was he worried Rodriguez would come back? Or was he like, these two, Ayuso and Covey, aren't really working together. Let's just get to the line and we'll go for a sprint.
I think it's a bit of a combination. I think that he trusted a sprint, most likely. I think the points probably matter quite a bit for Intermarché as well, but we've seen in Kuhne that they don't necessarily think about that in the heat of the moment towards the end of a race. So I'm not sure I can point at that as the reason for him pacing at that point. I was more curious at what UAE was trying to do later on because, Rota is pacing there for a bit, and UAE had, like you said, Ayuso and also Covey there, and it seemed like they weren't working together in the way that they both wanted to work together. As
Not
in,
at all.
Covey tried to attack in certain places. We had Ayuso trying to attack in other places, trying to roll over Rota a tiny bit, which is a valid strategy. On paper, Covey also has a sprint, but I haven't seen him against Rota 1v1, so I wouldn't be able to guess who would make it in that if it's just a fresh sprint at the end of this race. But I think it also mattered that UAE probably wasn't necessarily looking to work hardcore in that group as well because they know they've got another teammate in the group behind. And yes, he's with Carlos Rodriguez, but do you think that they were trying to make sure they are with 3 so they are more outnumbering the others?
No. I think Ayuso and Covey refuse to work for each other. I think Covey's like, you should lead me out for the sprint. What are you doing? It's a flat run in the last 1,500 meters. Covey had attacked through the tunnel and Ayuso closed him. I think it was full teammate breakdown is my view on it. And they completely lucked out because when they didn't lead each other out. And so Polance comes back. They kind of know. They were on the radio shouting at each other. I was like, this could be a viral video coming up. Unfortunately, Palance catches them, attacks. Rodriguez was with him but lost his wheel, and Palance basically dances away uncontested to win this race after being dropped on the Capomeli, but he was very aggressive before. And then Covey and Ayuso started sprinting after him, full gas, with Rota on their wheel. So you're going to look at the results here. Palance, Ayuso, Covey, 1, 2, 3 UAE, with Rota fourth, then Rodriguez, Lafay, Ulisi, Ciccone, Pache, Champoussin. You look at that 1, 2, 3, you're like, wow, they must have just really got this race right. It's like, well, they were definitely the strongest, but yeah, I'm interested to see how Ayuso goes
Yeah,
at Catalunya
I
with
agree.
Almeida and Soler.
Yes, certainly, because I actually agree with like the teamwork thing that didn't go as planned, because at a certain point Kobe was actually shouting to the front of the group in his microphone as well, while Yuza was also shouting at the front that he wasn't going to do anything, most likely. That's what I guess he was saying, because he wasn't pulling. And yeah, it's fascinating to see, and I'm also curious what it gives in future races and what it can give. And are they both riding Strade?
Let me have a look. For UAE, no,
Yuzo isn't.
Ayuso's
Okay.
not listed, but the full UAE team isn't listed at the moment.
Okay.
Kobe is. Let's talk about UAE though. 11 wins in, I mean, this is 2nd of March, so we've just ended the first 6 weeks of racing just about. 11 wins, 3 of them at World Tour level, being UAE, 2 mountain stages, plus the GC with Pogacar. So Pogacar's the only one to have won World Tour races. But not Sturban. Trentin won Le Semaine earlier in the week. We have Covey winning Murcia one day, Andalusia stage, McNulty winning Calviat and Fornardèche, a very high level. And now Jan Palance winning Trofeo Laigueglia, Gaviria winning a couple in Oman. Are UAE, who were so reliant on Pog last year, Benji, becoming a better all-round team? Or is this just randomness and also not top competition, particularly Oman with Gaviria?
Well, first of all, the Gaviria thing, I wouldn't look at that as being the factor here. I just think that Gaviria had not the best sprint competition. Richese was in form and gave him a proper lead out, that's for certain. But then we look at the other candidates in the squad that are actually getting victories, and I think Kovi's a bit of a growing up story. He was a potential rider to win races. Last year, I was already hyping up for certain races, and he really pushed through this year. He's got his breakout year, and I think that Kovi is legit. I think he's going to win a Giro stage. I've mentioned that quite a few times before. I'm hyping it up still. And when it comes to the rest of the squad, there's quite a few riders like this that are slowly but surely growing out of their baby shoes. Like Ayuso, yes, he joined, was it June last year, July last year? He's already growing out of the lower ends of UAE. Was a very talented rider, is only 19 and is getting these results already. Yes, he's not winning yet, but he's the kind of rider that gets Kovi's results of last year, and at a certain point, he's going to win a race. So these type of riders are just growing and progressing, and as a consequence, that makes the UAE team a broader team, a more in-depth team, a deeper team, to make sure that they can send riders like this to races like Laigueglia and are able to stack that and outnumber people in the final, outnumber the competitions in the final, because they have good riders, 6 good riders at the start here, or probably 7, but 6 of those were in that breakaway group. 6 were fighting the final, and 2 ended up in that actual final group of 3, which then 1 came back. So it's the outnumbering by being a deeper squad in a race like this that matters. And being able to stack such riders in a race like this means that you most likely have quite a few riders of a decent level in your squad, definitely compared to some of the other World Tour squads we have. Now, when we look at the incoming transfers, we spoke about it in the UAE pod we had, the preview pod. I think that also is with the goal of expanding the width of the team. Like, why do you get a sprinter Ackermann? You get also Hutch in the squad, Milano, Gaviria. Those are 4 sprinters. Well, the only reason that could give is that you want to send them to more races, or want to send good riders to more races to make sure you are oriented in every single big race and small race throughout the season. So you have every race with proper riders. And yeah, Ackermann is perhaps a bit of overkill. I agree with that, but I think that's also the reason why they got Almeida, for example, to stack it in the Giro and the Vuelta, so that Pogacar can do the Tour and perhaps the Vuelta, so that they have options in every single Grand Tour for GC. So I think that's the goal here for UAE, and I think they're doing it well so far. Sure, these are not the biggest races, but I think that Cor Vos is not at his max potential yet, for example. And we haven't even seen Hirschi ride this year. Perhaps he gets back to a level that is decent, unlike what we saw last year, for example. So it's curious. McNulty, forgot to talk about him. Also a rider that is now having a bit of a breakout year in terms of being able to do well in one-day races as well, you know?
Yeah, McNulty's definitely improved. I would say in terms of World Tour sprints, still no good. They got no lead out, and
Agree.
Gaviria is not slow. In terms of GC, yep, Pogacar sorted for his races. Almeida sorted there. Hill Classics still, it's all Pogacar. So if he's not there, Formula is the next best maybe. And Classics, it's all on Trentin, who, as we saw in Omloop in the World Tour Classic, he is isolated and he's just not as good as other guys. So I think, yeah, they, in these sort of hilly non-World Tour races, they are looking good. Are UAE going to be dominating Liège? I mean, Pogacar won it last year, but maybe with Hirschi back, perhaps. But
Yeah.
I'm not sure they are like the new superpower just because they've won 8.1.pro races in February. Obviously, Pogacar, they've still got the trump card of the best all-round GC rider in the world, and that's the most important piece to have. But in terms of depth dominating races, I don't see it. I don't see it yet. But if Hirschi comes back, maybe if McNulty keeps progressing, maybe like if McNulty starts winning 1 week GC races and Almeida as well at World Tour level, Benji, then they have a super team.
Yeah, I agree. But when it comes to the one-day races, there's also that factor of they're sending Pogacar to RVV and Dwars door Vlaanderen now. Is he going to be a factor in the final in those races? I'd expect him to be quite involved. But it's also something we'll see, I guess, and something we need to, observe before we can judge whether that's going to be a factor of improving their classics team as well. But again, that's kind of putting an extra burden on Pogacar, I would say.
Yeah, and you see Alaphilippe not doing the classics this year for Quickstep, despite being one of the top riders for it, and focusing on the Ardennes and the Tours. So how that will affect Pog, I'm not sure. Maybe heightened crash risk, etc. But that's UAE. Before we get into the Strade preview, a word from our show partners, Zwift. The Tour of Watopia starts next week. 5 stages of riding with 5 new routes, unlocks, and double XP, so your efforts help you level up twice as quickly. If you didn't see it, we actually had Jay Vine join the group ride last night. It was pretty fun. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at Lanterne Rouge CP to be kept updated on future Lanterne Rouge Cycling Podcast Zwift group rides. Thanks as always to Zwift for supporting the show.